Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep, into a topic that never seems to fade from the headlines, even decades later, the JFK assassination.
It's a subject that just keeps drawing you in, doesn't it?
It really does. And for this deep dive, we've got a fascinating collection of articles and resources. They all center around two conferences held in Dallas in November of 1998, the COPA Conference and the Lancer Conference, both just weeks before the 35th anniversary.
Wow, two conferences at the same time. Must have been a lot to take in.
It was, from what we can gather. Conferences, dedicated researchers, lingering questions. It all adds up to some serious intrigue. And to help us untangle it all, we have our expert here, who's amazing at connecting the dots and seeing the bigger picture.
I'm happy to be here and excited to dive into this material with you.
So let's start by setting the scene, transporting ourselves back to Dallas in 1998. It's the 35th anniversary of the JFK assassination. Imagine the atmosphere.
Dallas, 35 years after the assassination. Picture this. Two major conferences happening simultaneously, the COPA Conference and the Lancer Conference, each drawing in researchers from across the globe, all focused on the same event, but with such a variety of perspectives. And it wasn't just researchers from the US, You had groups like Dealey Plaza UK traveling all the way from England to be there.
Really? All the way from England. That's dedication.
It is, absolutely. They were there to pay their respects, to participate in the discussions, and to be a part of this community dedicated to uncovering the truth about what happened that day.
The sources you shared really paint a vivid picture of those few days leading up to the anniversary: shrines, crowds, a mix of tourists, and those deeply invested in the history.
There's this one quote that really stuck with me. It's from Ian Griggs, a member of that Dealey Plaza UK group. He called the assassination the worst thing that ever happened to Dallas, and perhaps the best.
The best. That's a strange way to put it.
Right. It is. But then he goes on to talk about the city's draw for tourists, how the assassination, tragically, has become part of Dallas's identity. It's a complex legacy, both for the city and for the nation.
So we have this blend of mourning, remembrance, investigation, and tourism, all converging in Dallas during those anniversary events.
Yeah.
Did the sources mention what the actual ceremony at Dealey Plaza was like?
They did. Hundreds gathered for a moment of silence at the exact time of the assassination, and there were speeches given by researchers and those who'd lost loved ones. The message was clear. The need for full disclosure from the government. Many felt the wounds of that day were still very raw, and the desire for truth and accountability was palpable, especially among the researchers.
And speaking of the desire for truth, let's talk about the media and how the events were being portrayed. One of the sources you provided was a CBS News report by Dan Rather, who claimed that the ARRB, the Assassination Records Review Board, found enough evidence to conclude that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only gunman. I imagine that didn't sit well with everyone, especially those attending those conferences.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The reaction was immediate and not positive. Many attendees saw it as CBS pushing the same tired lone gunman narrative, ignoring all the evidence that pointed toward a conspiracy.
So we're already seeing a clash here between the official narrative and those who question it.
Exactly. John Tunheim, a former chairman of the ARRB, actually happened to be at the COPA conference and was questioned about Rather's statement.
I bet that was an interesting conversation.
It was. Tunheim's response was a bit more measured, saying that the board's focus was on releasing records, not proving or disproving conspiracies. But for many researchers, that wasn't enough. They wanted answers, not just more documents.
Did any specific researchers stand out in their criticism of the media?
Yes, Mark Lane, a prominent figure in the research community, was very vocal in his criticism. He went after the Dallas Morning News for pushing that same lone gunman theory.
Oh, was this the same Mark Lane who was involved in the Jim Garrison investigation in New Orleans?
The very same. He wrote a book about it, in fact. But back to Dallas in 1998. Lane really let the Dallas Morning News have it, accusing them of ignoring public opinion, which overwhelmingly pointed toward a conspiracy. He actually said, when the day comes that the government of the United States tells us the truth, and all of the factual details about the assassination, including their role in this murder, when that day comes, for the first moment, honor will be restored to this nation.
Strong words.
Very strong. And they highlight the deep-seated distrust that exists within the research community towards official narratives.
It makes you wonder, what were mainstream media outlets missing? What were they overlooking in their rush to declare Oswald the lone gunman?
That's a great question, and one that these researchers were trying to answer. Dr. Gary Aguilar, who spoke at the Dealey Plaza ceremony, revealed something quite significant that didn't make it into mainstream media reports. Crucial autopsy photographs were missing.
Missing? How could crucial evidence like that just disappear?
That's what researchers wanted to know. Their absence raised even more questions about the official narrative and the thoroughness of the investigations that had been conducted over the years.
So even with the release of millions of documents by the ARRB, there were still crucial pieces missing. How did the researchers react to that?
It was a mixed bag. Some researchers acknowledged the board's work in releasing 4.5 million pages of documents, a truly impressive feat. But there was also this pervasive feeling that the ARRB's work was incomplete, a sense of unfinished business.
So they weren't satisfied. What were some of the criticisms they had?
Several things. They were unhappy that the board took so long to get started. There were complaints that they failed to interview key figures like Ruth and Michael Payne, who had housed Marina Oswald. And then there was the decision to ignore evidence relating to a figure named Mac Wallace. Plus, the fact that certain documents remained withheld just fueled suspicions.
But even with millions of pages released, it sounds like there were still many unanswered questions and a lingering feeling that the whole truth was still out there.
Exactly. One attendee, John Newman, an Auckland researcher, summed it up perfectly. He compared the ARRB to the Vietnam Memorial, saying, "Something very deep that took place in our country connects directly to Dealey Plaza, and I think most people know that. It speaks to this gut feeling that there's more to the story, that something isn't quite right."
It's a powerful analogy, and it really underscores the depth of feeling surrounding this event even decades later. So we have this backdrop of mistrust, missing information, and a dedicated research community determined to uncover the truth. Where do we go from here? Who are some of the key players, and what are their theories? Let's delve into those presentations and discussions.
Absolutely, let's do that. The sources highlight some fascinating figures and their work. For instance, we have Vincent Salandria, who believed that Oswald was an intelligence agent playing a role in a much larger operation.
So right off the bat, we're diving into the deep end of conspiracy theories.
Well, not necessarily a conspiracy theory in Salandria's eyes. He saw it as following the evidence where it led. He was particularly critical of the media for uncritically accepting and promoting the image of Oswald as a lone Marxist radical.
It sounds like he believed that was a deliberate misdirection.
Exactly. He argued that by portraying Oswald in that way, the media became complicit in covering up the truth. He actually said, "In publicizing without criticism this false Marxist cloak of Oswald, the American press joined the criminality of our U.S. intelligence assassins as accessories after the fact."
Wow, that's a strong statement. So Salandria believed Oswald was a pawn, a tool of the intelligence agencies. Were there other researchers who shared similar views?
Yes, many researchers focused on Oswald's potential intelligence connections, but some took a different approach, like E. Martin Schatz.
What was his focus?
Schatz was less about specific details and more about the bigger picture, the way truth gets distorted and compromised over time.
How so?
He presented this intriguing parable about the waters of knowledge. He argued that as we delve deeper into the truth, the waters become murkier, and we're often tempted to compromise, to settle for easier answers to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty.
It's like choosing to stay in the shallow end of the pool where it's clear and safe, rather than venturing into the deeper, murkier waters where the real answers might lie.
That's a great way to put it. And Schatz was a strong advocate for pushing past that discomfort, for embracing the uncertainty and continuing to search for those deeper truths, no matter how unsettling they might be.
So Salandria focused on Oswald's potential role as an intelligence asset, and Schatz challenged us to confront the uncomfortable truths hidden beneath the surface. What about the other researchers?
Well, there was William Davey, who really went deep into CIA involvement.
Okay, let's talk about that. What did Davey uncover?
He focused on the case of Clay Shaw, the New Orleans businessman who was prosecuted by Jim Garrison for conspiracy to assassinate JFK.
Oh, wow, that's a whole other rabbit hole.
It is, and Davey presented some compelling evidence suggesting that the CIA was illegally feeding information to Shaw's attorneys during the trial, essentially trying to sabotage Garrison's case.
If that's true, it raises serious questions about the extent of the CIA's influence and their willingness to interfere in legal proceedings.
Exactly, and it highlights the need to carefully examine all the evidence, even in cases that seem settled.
So we have these threads connecting Oswald to intelligence agencies, potential CIA interference in legal proceedings, and this overarching theme of challenging official narratives. What else did these conferences reveal?
Remember Lisa Pease and Lawrence Teeter? They weren't focused on the JFK assassination at all, but on the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy.
Oh, that's right. I'd almost forgotten. They presented at these conferences too.
They did. Both were convinced that Sirhan Sirhan, the man convicted of RFK's murder, was innocent, and that there was a much larger conspiracy at play.
It seems the intrigue surrounding the Kennedy assassinations goes far beyond Dallas.
Absolutely. Pease, in particular, went deep into the forensic evidence.
What did she find?
She focused on bullet trajectories and witness discrepancies that didn't align with the official narrative, suggesting that Sirhan Sirhan couldn't have acted alone and that there was at least one other gunman involved.
Okay, so this is starting to sound familiar, challenging the lone gunman theory, just like with the JFK assassination. What else did Pease focus on?
Well, she brought up this intriguing figure named Khyber Khan.
Who was Khyber Khan?
He was a CIA-linked individual who was actually working within the RFK campaign.
Hold on, a CIA asset working on RFK's campaign. What was he doing there?
That's what researchers like Pease were trying to figure out. His presence raises all sorts of questions about potential motives and hidden agendas within the campaign itself.
It definitely adds another layer of intrigue to an already incredibly complex case.
Yeah.
What about Lawrence Teeter? What was his take on the RFK assassination?
Teeter was Sirhan's attorney at the time, and he was adamant that the LAPD was involved in a massive cover-up from the very beginning.
A cover-up. What kind of cover-up?
Teeter argued that the LAPD mishandled evidence, intimidated witnesses, and essentially railroaded Sirhan Sirhan to secure a conviction.
That's a bold accusation. Did he have any evidence to back that up?
He presented a lot of circumstantial evidence, pointing to inconsistencies in witness testimonies, mishandling of forensic evidence, and a general lack of transparency from the LAPD.
So we're seeing these themes of evidence tampering and potential cover-ups emerge in both the JFK and RFK assassinations. It's quite unsettling.
It is, and these themes were explored in even more detail in the presentations by John Armstrong and Chris Courtwright, both of whom were deeply concerned about the potential for evidence manipulation and the need for greater transparency when it comes to these historical records.
Okay, let's dive into that. What did Armstrong and Courtwright uncover?
Armstrong focused on the JFK assassination, specifically the handling of Lee Harvey Oswald's belongings. He presented a detailed analysis of photographs taken by the Dallas police and later by the FBI, claiming that these photos had been altered.
Altered? What do you mean?
He argued that certain items had been removed or obscured in the later FBI photos, potentially to manipulate the narrative surrounding Oswald and his motives.
What kind of items are we talking about? Give me some examples.
One of the most striking examples was that Minox camera we discussed earlier, the one found among Oswald's belongings. In the Dallas police photos, it's clearly identified as a camera, but in the FBI photos, it's labeled as a light meter, and its appearance seems to have been subtly altered.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Why would someone go to the trouble of changing the label on a camera in a photo? What's the significance of that?
Well, Armstrong argued that a Minox camera, often used for espionage, would raise uncomfortable questions about Oswald's potential connections to intelligence agencies. By mislabeling it as a light meter, they could downplay its significance and reinforce the narrative of Oswald as a lone wolf, a disgruntled ex-Marine with no ties to anything bigger.
So by manipulating this one detail, they could potentially shape the whole narrative. It's a subtle but powerful way to control the story. Did Armstrong find any other examples of potential tampering?
He did. He also talked about inconsistencies in Oswald's W-2 forms, the tax documents that employers provide.
Tax forms. What could be so controversial about tax forms?
Armstrong claimed that the W-2s attributed to Oswald had inconsistencies in their formatting and information, suggesting they might have been fabricated or altered.
Okay, now we're really getting into conspiracy theory territory. Fabricated tax forms. What would be the point of that?
It's certainly a bold claim, and Armstrong's presentation sparked a lot of debate. The implications are significant, though. If these documents were indeed fabricated, it suggests a deliberate effort to manipulate the paper trail surrounding Oswald, potentially to create a false history or to obscure his real activities.
It's a lot to take in. So we have Armstrong raising these serious concerns about potential evidence tampering in the JFK assassination. What about Chris Courtwright? What was his focus?
Courtwright focused on a slightly different but related issue: the need for continued access to assassination records. He recognized that even with the work of the ARRB, there were still significant obstacles to accessing these crucial documents. He was particularly worried about what would happen after the ARRB's mandate expired in 1998.
So while Armstrong was focused on the potential for evidence manipulation in the past, Courtwright was looking towards the future, trying to ensure that these records would remain accessible for future generations of researchers.
That's interesting.
What were his concerns? Why did he think access to these records might be limited in the future?
He argued that existing mechanisms like the Freedom of Information Act or FOIA were simply inadequate for this kind of investigation.
Why is that? What are the limitations of FOIA?
Courtwright outlined a few key concerns. Firstly, FOIA has many broad exemptions that allow agencies to withhold information, often for reasons of national security or ongoing investigations. And secondly, there's no real independent oversight to ensure agencies are complying with FOIA requests.
So there's a lot of room for agencies to delay, redact, or even refuse to release documents without much accountability.
Exactly. And when dealing with something as sensitive as the Kennedy assassination, where the potential for cover-ups is very real, that lack of transparency is a huge problem.
It sounds like Courtwright was advocating for a more robust and transparent system for accessing these records. What did he propose?
He called for new legislation, essentially picking up where the ARRB learned off. He envisioned a system that would mandate continued cooperation from government agencies, ensure independent review of any withheld documents, and provide adequate resources for the National Archives to manage the massive collection of JFK-related materials.
That's a tall order. Did he offer any specific suggestions for how to achieve that?
He did. He had clearly given this a lot of thought.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What were his ideas?
He suggested a few key things. First, he wanted agencies to maintain designated liaisons specifically for JFK Act requests, just like they'd had with the ARRB. This would ensure a clear point of contact and a streamlined process for handling these requests.
That makes sense. Streamlining the process and creating a dedicated point of contact could certainly help cut through some of the bureaucratic red tape. What else?
Secondly, he proposed an independent oversight task force composed of experts from various fields to review any documents that agencies claimed they couldn't release.
So a second set of eyes, so to speak, to make sure that information isn't being withheld unnecessarily.
Precisely. And finally, he stressed the importance of properly funding the National Archives to handle the sheer volume of JFK-related materials.
It's a massive undertaking, isn't it? Millions of pages of documents, photographs, recordings, all requiring careful preservation and management to ensure that they're accessible for future generations.
Absolutely. And without adequate funding, much of that material could be lost or become inaccessible.
It's clear that both Armstrong and Courtwright were raising some serious concerns about the way evidence has been handled in the past and the potential for limited access to these vital records in the future. They were both urging a greater level of transparency and accountability when it comes to the JFK assassination.
And they were both deeply committed to ensuring that the search for truth continues.
It's remarkable, isn't it? The dedication of these researchers, the willingness to spend years, even decades, poring over documents, chasing down leads, and challenging official narratives. It's inspiring, really. It reminds us that history is not just something that happened in the past. It's a living narrative that we can all participate in shaping. We can question, investigate, and seek out alternative perspectives. We can choose to follow the motive, not the bullshit, as that reader in Fair Play so aptly put it.
It's a commitment, that's for sure, and not always an easy one. These researchers often face ridicule. They're dismissed as conspiracy theorists, yet they persist. They're driven by something bigger, this belief that the truth matters, that it has the power to change the way we see the world.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that because the sources actually give us a glimpse into that human side of things. We've touched upon the passing of Mike Robinson, a dedicated researcher, but there are other stories too.
Right, like those tributes to Harold Weisberg in Fair Play magazine. He's considered one of the pioneers of JFK assassination research, and the magazine asked readers to share how his work had impacted them.
It's a testament to his legacy, how his research continues to inspire and influence others, even after his death.
It is, and those reader letters are a real window into the mindset of this community.
They are, aren't they? They're full of frustration with the official narrative, urging fellow researchers to keep digging, keep following the evidence wherever it leads. You really get a sense of that shared commitment to uncovering the truth.
And there's that line we talked about earlier, follow the motive and not the bullshit. It's blunt but gets right to the heart of it. It's about cutting through the noise, ignoring the distractions, and focusing on the underlying reasons behind the assassination and its cover-up.
We've been diving deep into some of those potential motives, from Oswald's possible connections to intelligence agencies to Kennedy's foreign policy decisions, particularly regarding Vietnam and Cuba.
And let's not forget the medical evidence. Doug Horn's presentation about the ARRB's efforts to obtain those Air Force One recordings was particularly intriguing.
Those recordings could hold crucial information about the immediate aftermath of the assassination, the conversations, the reactions of those involved. It's frustrating to think that the full recordings are still out there, somewhere, potentially containing answers to so many questions.
And the fact that the minutes from that Vietnam conference, just weeks before the assassination, are still missing is equally frustrating.
Those minutes could shed light on Kennedy's thinking at the time, his intentions regarding Vietnam, and whether or not he was planning a withdrawal of U.S. troops.
A withdrawal that could have had major implications for those who benefited from the war effort.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What else is out there? What other pieces of the puzzle are still missing?
It's a question that drives these researchers. They're constantly searching, digging, piecing together fragments of information, trying to make sense of it all.
And they're not giving up. There's that upcoming conference in 1999, the Providence Conference on the JFK assassination, with the theme From Evidence to Truth and Justice.
A fitting title, wouldn't you say? This relentless pursuit of truth. It's at the heart of everything we've been discussing today.
It is. And it's not just about the JFK assassination. It's about questioning official narratives, holding power accountable, and recognizing that history is not set in stone, that it can be reinterpreted, challenged, and rewritten as new evidence emerges.
Exactly. And it's a process we can all participate in. We can choose to be passive consumers of information, accepting what we're told, or we can be active seekers of truth, questioning, investigating, and forming our own conclusions.
Well said. This deep dive has been an eye-opener, to say the least. We've covered a lot of ground, from the atmosphere in Dallas during the 35th anniversary to the work of individual researchers, the successes and shortcomings of the ARRB, and the ongoing efforts to ensure that the truth about the Kennedy assassination is not buried or forgotten.
It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it? And it's a journey that doesn't end here. There are countless books, articles, documentaries, and online resources dedicated to this topic. We encourage you, our listener, to continue exploring, to delve deeper into the areas that interest you, and to never stop questioning.
A huge thank you to you, our expert, for guiding us through this incredible material. Your insights and expertise have been invaluable.
My pleasure. It's always a privilege to delve into this topic and to share what I've learned.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of JFK assassination research. We'll leave you with that powerful quote from Fair Play. Follow the motive and not the bullshit. Keep questioning, keep digging, and keep seeking the truth.